Let me start by just quickly introduce myself. My name is Spencer Lugash. I've been a real estate attorney since 1997 and a real estate broker since 1999, and I've been broker of record and general counsel for a number of local brokerages here in San Diego. And we have a great panel for you guys today. Here in person, we have Jane Rheinheimer, who is the attorney at Intelink Law Group, and she specializes for over 30 years in the defense of real estate licensees and brokerages. And then via Zoom, we have Rick Hagen, broker of record of Coldwell Banker West, and we have Carla Farley, who is your immediate past president of the Greater San Diego Association of Realtors, as well as affiliated with Smart Coast, California. So, I think we have a little bit of a timing issue trying to make up for some time, so we're gonna get started here pretty quick. We have kind of two different topics that we're gonna be discussing today, a little juxtaposition of the two between fire and water, right? So we're gonna be talking about sea level rise, as well as home hardening and fire hardening issues that we now are faced with the new statutory disclosures. So let's just get started, and we're gonna dive in first with the sea level rise. And I'm gonna go to Carla for that. There she is. Hi, Carla.
Right. Hi. I'm gonna share my screen.
Okay,
we have
perfect.
my slides, right?
So is your screen that we're seeing? Oh, there we go. Okay. So if you can start and just give us a little brief synopsis about what the sea level rise is and its impact on the real estate industry for us.
I think that this will get to it when it has in there. So, of course, he had in here the two key questions that you'll end up talking about, of course, is how do you protect, how do homeowners protect their property from the rising seas, and, of course, how to best manage it from a risk management perspective. Background, California Coastal Commission was basically requiring the municipalities to update their local coastal programs with language that was really, really concerning. You had a few voices out there and you started hearing people at C.A.R. we started hearing a lot about it. But they wanted them to address that plan and put in writing basically how they would account for sea level rise in their plan. And of course, put it in writing, could be dangerous. The policy issues surrounding that, of course, manage retreat, the definition of existing structures, and then regulatory takings, and I'll talk about that. The picture you see, before I get into some of this other stuff here, you'll see on the one the current sea level, and you can clearly see clean around. I think this is Coronado where we're at, yeah. And then on the other side, you see with just 6 feet of sea level rise where it impacts going in there. You see the water coming up on the land there. You get that part in there. But the part that they don't tell you when you look at these diagrams that they put out, that's over a 100-year span if you get to 6 feet. And that's the issue that we have. So we don't refute that sea level rise is there and that it would happen, but it's merely the timing that you're asking people to account for it in. So most people, we probably won't even see it in this lifetime if that were to happen. Again, you can see that with Mission Bay, the same thing. Current sea level where it is now, what it would look like if we had about 6 foot of sea level rise. And then again in La Jolla, wow. That's a big change, a very big change. But again, probably over a 100-year span. So the California Coastal Act, of course, addresses issues when they talk about protecting properties that are existing structures, and this becomes a big debate that we'll see playing out this year and the next for sure. Moving forward, they already have in their guidelines and their policy that their existing structures are properties that have been built before 1976. And that's a key year, 1976. And is that to say that properties built after that, sea level rise starts happening, aren't existing properties? And so this whole definition battle will play out. It is very, very important that we get those properties included in existing structures so that they have some protection. Realtors' response to that And this is where I talked about Smart Coast California being the only one of its kind, where it is a realtor-led association, realtor association-led advocacy program, or actually entity now, because we are a 501c3. There is that was the 2021 board of directors. 2022, you still have most of the same people, with Joe Crean being the 2022 president this year. It is made up of 29 local AORs up and down the coast of California. So we now have all local AORs who are on that coast who are participating in this organization. And then again, also getting a heavyweight lift of support from C.A.R, which earlier I was thanking Sanjay for. We've been able to garner just about over $1 million from C.A.R and NAR in support of Smart Coast California, which allows us to move forward with the advocacy and helping property owners, helping your officials. You would be surprised how many of your officials do not understand the impact of sea level rise and what it can do. And how many of them don't know that it is a lot of land that's covered. As I said earlier, it can go inland up to 3 miles, the Coastal Commission's jurisdiction. And so that's a lot of property, and it's not just houses, it's land, there's anything else in between there. So it definitely impacts a lot. So you might be talking about just right on the edge and thinking, I don't do coastal properties. No, if you're probably selling properties anywhere down in Mission Bay, Rosecrans, anywhere in there, you're dealing with sea level rise, and it's going to hit you. So we need to make ourselves aware of what's happening. Again, that's just showing the representation of the local AORs. From San Diego, of course, we have myself, and we also have our current president, Chris Anderson, who is on that board as well, and she's been on there as well from its inception. Sea level rise disclosures, the most important thing that realtors can do today, and especially here in San Diego, we got our coastal cities like Del Mar who are leading the way in this pushback and fight with the Coastal Commission. I call it a fight, they say it's not a fight, God says it's a fight. I'm just being honest. Your disclosures. Again, do not think that you are not involved in this as a realtor. This can go so far out. There's some language that has been written, and we don't know which ones end up getting approved or not approved down the line, but there's some great language that is very, very vague. And when you say things like properties that touch or join to the east of the coast, well, to the east, all properties from the coast join, right? Going to the east. Where do you stop? You can go across the United States with that back then. So it just depends. So you want to make sure that you are really making sure you use your disclosures. In June of last year, C.A.R. added a disclosure, added to the SBSA, there's a disclosure for sea level rise. So you want to make sure if you are in these cities that are along the coast that you are using the SBSA. If you are SDAR members, we definitely have some other stuff coming in play. We've updated our local, Rick? I can't even think of it right now. Why is it leaving?
Local area disclosures?
Yeah, local area disclosure, yeah, LAD, that's right, LAD. We've updated that as well to include sea level rise. So you guys really want to use that. This is people doing the legwork, already getting in there, looking at the risk and making sure that we are covering not only the agents, but your clients as well as your brokerages. There's on this sheet here, and I think they've probably sent this out or it's in whatever documentation, some resources where you can get coastal information. San Diego is heavily in it right now, I can tell you that. I know that the mayor actually just went on a trip doing some sea level rise conversation in some other countries, and so it is coming forward. Again, it is a topic that we will not be able to touch here as far as what really is happening and what it's about, but that is a greater opportunity for you to get involved with SDAR. And we'll have conversations around this. Government affairs always has conversations around this. We will have advocacy around this. We will need your help when it comes to this. When these properties, and I'll just be brief on this part, when they come under this jurisdiction and are not able to armor their shores, when we talk about managed retreat, be it reefs, sanding, those different things that keep back the high tide, when they cannot do that, the Coastal Commission has basically deemed that they can take those properties. And right now what they're doing is taking those properties without just compensation. Although their very constitution calls for them to give you just compensation for your property, and they're not doing that. And so those are things that we're advocating for. Those are things that we're educating people about, and making sure that our municipalities are not just writing this stuff in and not being aware of the impact to their counties or their cities. So when they go forward, we're saying, hey, don't put that stuff in there. Look at what it's going to do first and make sure you know what you're putting in there.
Carla, can I stop you for 1 second? Because I want to touch real quick on what you just said. So I want to make sure we understand, you're saying that there is legislation in place right now that allows local municipalities to come in and take properties through eminent domain that fall within the jurisdiction of the sea level rise, which I think you said is anything east of the coast. Is that correct?
But I stood it, let's shorten it.
Okay.
But Coastal Commission does have jurisdiction over properties that can go up to inland about 3 miles. But in their own constitution, Coastal Commission has its own constitution, which of course is its guidelines, its preamble, right? Of what they can do. And they do, you're right about that. They can do eminent domain on properties that cannot protect themselves, right? If they're going to be damaged by the sea level rise that they're anticipating. But you can't do that if they only have certain, certain mechanisms in place that aren't very cost effective, like, and this is a real one, you have the option to move your property. So I don't know how many people could just pick up a house and move it.
And where would they move it to?
Your option to pick up a house and move it, or they can take that property from you. And like I said, right now, without just compensation, their constitution says that they should, they have to provide just compensation. And so those are some things that we are advocating, pulling out and putting back in the forefront so that people understand what their particular rights are in this process. That's a lot of property. That's, and you guys see the eroding cliffs, you see a lot of things happening, but there are a lot of other measures that you can do. And part of what Smart Coast California is advocating for is the tiered response, basically saying, let's watch and see, because you're talking about a 100-year span, right? So let's watch and see what happens now. If you get this thing in place, then it triggers this type of a mechanism to happen. If you get this next phase, you know, that kind of a thing like that. If we see a foot come in, then maybe you start requiring properties to do a particular thing. Because again, you're asking people today to do something for something that you're saying is going to happen in 100 years.
Have you seen any properties being taken through eminent domain based on these legislation?
Yes, they have been already. Yeah, they have. And Northern California. So that has happened.
Carla, I think one of the concerns that I would have to try and advise our agents, right, our members, is as a member of the association, this information can sound very, very frightening without context. So I wonder, as a broker, I guess I'm asking you, where's the line right now? What is the standard of care for an agent working in the community? Is it sufficient to just deliver the statewide buyers and sellers advisory and the local area disclosure and tell your buyer these are issues and they're growing in their, what's the right word, importance, and you need to investigate this if the property's near the coast?
They definitely need to investigate it. And these resources down here on the bottom, this screen are some of those places that you can give them information to look and see. But the most important thing is that it is present and it is growing. And so we don't know what it's gonna look like. And you guys know how that is in real estate. You know, 5 years from now, they're like, hey, wait a minute, what happened? You didn't tell me this. And I've had something like that. So, you know, we gotta do our best to at least say the conversation is being had in your city, and you might wanna check it out. This is something where you definitely want to, if I could say CYA, and do everything that you can, in these disclosures, you guys get it, do everything that you can to disclose it and at least get them some resources to make a decision. Don't make the decision for them, but you definitely want to get them the information. It is growing.
So I didn't get a chance to see your slide presentation before, so are we at the end of it? Do you have more?
Yeah, no, we're ready at the end of it. I'll
Okay.
say this again because it's very short. For more detail, this conversation is not ending. It is ever going. And so SDAR is going to put on something specifically for a deep dive into sea level rise and how it's impacting even in San Diego County right now, in addition to the state, but we can dig down into San Diego County and how we can more help in that process and advocating and what we need to do out there. Because a lot of times, as us being boots on the ground, we can get our homeowners, we can get our property owners involved in this fight. They actually serve better advocating for it, you know? And so there's a way that we can do that, but we'll talk about those different things and then really get into, like, you know, what is shoreline protection, those type of things, so you can understand exactly what it is and what's happening. But again, that takes you to connect. You gotta connect to SDAR, right? And you gotta make sure that we're, I'm gonna just do a plug, and it's not shameless. We gotta make sure that we're doing our $20 contribution. That advocacy is huge. It is huge. And you see that come back. When I say that we got over $1 million from C.A.R. and N.A.R., that advocacy is huge. So you do see that money come back. You might not feel it because you're not selling that coastal property, but when your fight comes, and there's plenty of them, we got plenty of fights in California to go around for the realtors. So you want to make sure that you guys are doing that contribution. But again, stay connected to SDAR. Sea level rise is on the rise, and it is very alive and present in San Diego. And like Rick said, not just those two forms. You want to make sure you give them some resources. But it is a conversation we definitely need to have, and not just if you can just see the water, go right back in. If you're anywhere near you can smell salt, you might want to give them these different disclosures.
Yeah, thank you, Carla. So can always count on Carla for a pitch to get involved in local issues, which is great. And this is definitely one that I think could become a real issue for us, especially if we start seeing some of these takings here in San Diego County from a real estate, industry position. That's going to start causing a lot of problems with our agents. So make sure for us as realtors, as brokers, that you guys are using the disclosures that are provided, and that if you are definitely within 3 miles of the shore, it sounds like you need to be having conversations with your clients and making sure that they're aware of some of these sources that Carla has up on the screen and that are on the SBSA, so that they can go out and do more information for themselves. So thanks, Carla. Stick around so
Thank
at
you.
the end we have some questions for you, okay? All right, so we're gonna move on to fire dispensable space. I'm sure all of you, I hope, are aware of C.A.R's form that came out, the Fire Hardening and Defensible Space Advisory. That was May of 2021, and since that has come out, it has caused havoc in the community, because I know for me as a broker and many of the other brokers, Rick, I know he's in the same boat, we have gone back and forth with the state and to try and determine exactly what it is that they want and what they are saying, and they have been very contradictory in their own language in the legislation, and so it's been very difficult for us to determine how we're going to use this form and what exactly it means. So let's kind of just get into it. So yeah, Jane, if you could just give a brief summary of what this law is and what prompted the new form.
Sure, okay, and I'll make this quick, but just to tee this up and what the controversy in the field is, as you know, the legislature addressed the issue of defensible space and fire hardening of structures over the past several years, finally enacting in 2019 AB38, which then went on to basically change the disclosure obligations of sellers of, 1 to 4 properties and others in terms of defensible space and in terms of the hardening of structures that are being marketed for sale. So beginning on January 1, 21, you had to make certain disclosures regarding any known issues with that might make the structure more susceptible to wildfire destruction. And then beginning July 1, 2021, you needed to start making disclosures about defensible space and the requirement that an inspection be done to determine what defensible space issues were involved with the property. And again, I'll let Rick and Spencer address this some more, but the issue, just to tee it up, is basically that there is what appears to be a pretty glaring problem or divergence of opinion between the state, the legislature, CAL FIRE, the people who are responsible for implementing this, on the one hand, and C.A.R. on the other hand, in terms of whether this is a point of sale issue and who is responsible for the defensible space inspection, disclosure, and remediation. And again, the state seems to say it is the seller's obligation to obtain the defensible space inspection within 6 months of entering into a contract to sell the property, and the C.A.R. form that we're going to be looking at defaults to this is the responsibility of the buyer within 1 year of purchase. So with that conflict outlined, I'll leave it to these gentlemen.
Do we, and we don't have a definitive source on really who we're going to rely on?
We do not have a definitive source. Obviously, you're going to use the C.A.R. forms, but obviously this is a point that's negotiable between your buyer and your seller. So although it defaults to the buyer might very reasonably say, nah, I'm not going to be responsible for that, and punt it back to the seller for it to be the seller's responsibility. The problem is if you get one of these reports and it's not a good report, or there's a lot of remediation that needs to be done, that needs to be done within a certain period of time, or you start incurring fines, which become pretty confiscatory at some point. So sellers may be reluctant, buyers may be reluctant to pull the trigger on what could be a very expensive remediation.
And then there's an issue of who does these inspections. So, Rick, maybe you can help us out with that. Do you know where do agents go to even figure out whether they need an inspection and who would be performing the inspection if they wanted to get that done?
Right. So I'm going to do something I do in almost every time I'm asked to speak. I'm going to say I'm not your broker. So please make sure you defer back to your broker if you hear something here that you're not able to ask a question about, but it contradicts directions receiving from your broker. We do know that everybody is directing us to rely on the natural hazard disclosure statement in order to determine whether the property is in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. Our challenge is, and one of the reasons I think we wanted this to be a breakout today, is that there is a new law that took effect January 1st, 2022. It's Senate Bill 36, and that amends AB 38 and the current statute. What does that do? We're going to hear more about that, I think, from Gov today, but I wanted to hit that very quickly, if you don't mind, Spencer. And really, if we look at the maps, and here's a link to the mapping for San Diego County, The SB36, which goes into effect January 1st, requires the state fire marshal to go into all the local responsibility areas and read and define what zones in there are very high fire hazard severity zones versus high fire hazard severity zones, right? They want the fire marshal to go back and differentiate between high and very high zones. Well, if you look at this map, you'll see the local responsibility area is most of the urban area of San Diego County. It's everything in the light gray. And you'll see the mapping, it really has light gray or it has dark red, and that's the very high fire hazard severity zones within the local responsibility areas. So the state fire marshal is supposed to release new maps. The maps have not been released yet, but once those maps are released, then we go back to AB 38 that says any property within a high or very high fire hazard severity zone has to go through this inspection component. It has this inspection component in the documentation of compliance component. So as soon as those maps are released, then in any property within this local responsibility area that you see that now is suddenly has not been very high, but is now a high severity zone, that's now going to trigger this inspection requirement, okay? So that's, I think, why we want to talk about this a little bit more detail today, so you guys know what's current. That's the most current information, and I'm sure Doug will talk about it. When we talk about who's responsible, I think we need also to talk about DRE, Spencer, that's what you're asking me, indirectly, but the DRE is concerned that if you just have your client sign a form, right, or if you just tell your seller, hey, go get this inspection, then you haven't advised the client what the potential risks are. So, you know, a seller hopefully understands it since 2005, I think it was. Jane, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but since 2005, there's been a defensible space law in the state that says if your property's in a fire hazard zone, you have to keep defensible space around the property. So the only thing that changed in 2021 was the requirement to disclose this, and then this idea of a point of sale inspection. So when we get to the point of sale inspection, C.A.R. read the law. They said very clearly, look, this is not a blanket point of sale requirement. And CAL FIRE's opinion was it is. But the most recent information we have, and this comes back to the CAL FIRE, if you go to CAL FIRE's website, this language is on CAL FIRE's website, and the link is at the top. But it says very clearly, the seller has not obtained the documentation of compliance, which we all refer to as the inspection, right? Then the buyer will do it, and the buyer will do it within 1 year. So if you're a buyer's agent and you have a buyer who's signing the fire hardening defensible space form accepting responsibility, but they don't understand what the risks are, then effectively your buyer just wrote a blank check, right? Because they don't know what's going to happen. So the concern we have at C.A.R. with the Risk Management Committee is how do you mitigate that risk? The Department of Real Estate is anticipating complaints from consumers that have written blank checks and don't know it. So it's important to advise your clients about this and then to make sure the buyer makes an informed decision. So how do we get an informed decision will be the next question. And the challenge we've heard recently is that some regions, some areas are not even doing inspections, or you can't get an inspection done before your expected close of escrow. So since the buyer can't automatically order a government inspection on a property with the seller's written consent, we're seeing more private companies get involved in doing defensible space inspections on behalf of buyers. I think we'll see that trend continue, and I think you need to be advising, and talk to your broker, but I think you need to be advising your buyers to either verify that your physical inspection company offers a defensible space inspection, or they find another company and advise them to get a defensible space inspection from a private party that can give them an informed decision as to what the potential risks are when the state comes out to inspect their property.
And as Rick was mentioning, obviously you're going to want to check with your broker, if you're not a broker, to find out exactly what their position is on this. Rick, we have 5 minutes left in an entirety, or 5 minutes until we ask questions? Entirety. Okay, so we will probably want to get to some questions. Does anybody, there's cards on the table if anybody has any questions that they want to put forth. I think somebody's, okay, he's walking around. I
think one of the questions that I'd like to ask Jane to cover is as an attorney who does, I think, a fantastic job defending real estate agents and brokers for years, what's your level of concern with this, and also with the if you go back to the sea level rise, where do you think we need to be right now as this issue is developing?
Well, thank you, Rick. You're very kind. And you know, as always, it's from a risk management standpoint, and Carla referred to this as well. The most important thing is that you make sure that your principal is making the decision, not you. So give them the information, give them the tools they need to make as informed a decision as possible, but be very careful that you do not step over the line to become the decision maker, be the lawyer writing, you know, language that you ought not to be writing into a contract or into an addendum that could cross the line into the, you know, unauthorized, unlicensed practice of law. It's like anything else. It's like the pest, you know, the pest inspection addendum used to be when they changed that, and you had to negotiate this back and forth, and who was going to pay for it, and so forth, except for, you know, the difference being that this one you can't just arbitrarily cap at some dollar that's agreeable to everybody. So I would say the most important thing is to keep an eye, you know, keep yourself informed, get involved with the advocacy, get involved with you know, your community and what your brokerage is doing and what your local association is doing in terms of meeting these, you know, keeping on top of these things, and then, you know, provide your principals with the best information available.
So our first question kind of leads right into what you were just talking about. And the question is, what verbiage should a listing agent / seller use in a counteroffer to pass the responsibility for the defensible space inspection and remediation to the buyer, you know, for the buyer to complete it after close of escrow? So I'm going to let you answer that, but just real quick, I always tell my agents that if they shouldn't be writing anything into a counteroffer or a contract that's more than like 7 words, because once you get past that, you're really starting to write new clauses and fundamentally change the contract. So.
Right. If we could look at Rick, do you have the form?
Yeah.
They can put it on the screen. So if we look at Form FHDS, which is the disclosure and addendum regarding this issue, paragraph. Thank you. Paragraph 4 deals specifically with defensible space requirements, and specifically paragraph B, subsections 1 through 4 deal with what the default position is, if there is a local ordinance, and if there is not a local ordinance. And at this point in time, as we sit here in San Diego County, there are no local ordinances in effect. So these will all default to either B1 or B2. So the default is B1, which says that the buyer shall obtain documentation of compliance. So that's the default position. If your buyer doesn't want to take that on, then you would put in simple language in your counteroffer that basically says, you know, paragraph B2 shall apply. We're not going to default to B1. You know, the buyer wants B2, where the seller is responsible for providing the inspection and clearance, or having done so within 6 months. Did I get that right, Rick?
Yeah, I think so. I think the only challenge is if you look at B2, it does say seller within the past 6 months has already obtained documentation.
Right.
So I think your language is right, but I think it needs to be written in. I don't think you could just defer to
Default
B2.
to that. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
But like, you know, like Spencer said, keep it simple, and I love the 7 words. That's awesome. Excellent.
Right. What's that old saying? If you add punctuation to a statement in a contract, then you're performing legal services.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So, Rick, let me ask you this question, because this comes up a lot. So we know that the requirement is if it's in a high fire zone or a very high fire zone,
Yep.
but most, if not all, that I'm aware of our NHD reports only lists whether property is in a severe or high fire zone, severely high fire zone, not just a high fire zone. So the question is basically, the NHD doesn't match the CAL FIRE maps. Are you aware of whether or not there are going to be some new maps or any new, you know, alternatives to align those two a little bit better?
Well, right, Spencer, thank you. That's a great question. And this is going to change a little bit with SB36 now, because now we're talking about the NHC companies doing more than what the issue is now. The issue now is, you know, we don't have a clear definition of the high fire hazard zones in all areas, and the NHD does say this property is located in, but that's for the very high fire hazard zone. The majority of the NHD companies, the larger ones, I hate to say it that way, but the ones that I've seen do have an SB36 component now added to the report. But you'll see that in most cases right now they're saying the maps are not available yet. So they can't tell you whether or not this property is gonna fall within the new guidelines under SB36 yet. So what do you need to do? Well, the good thing about the NHD reports is they give the seller a resource which tells them who is the authority that's responsible for their property, and that the authority needs to be contacted to find out if this defensible space certification of compliance is required or not. So it's going to require that extra step. Many agents are going to be doing that for their consumers. The challenge is, you know, everybody has their own operational preference when it comes to, do you have the seller make that call or do you do it on behalf of your client? So that's a choice I'll leave to you guys to decide. But the information is contained in the NHDs, and we're hopeful that they will be updating their reports to show the high fire hazard zones. But right now they're not going to, so it's going to require contact.
Well, if you do it, you gotta make sure you do it right.
Yeah.
There you go.
And you can use that website as well, right?
Yeah, I was just gonna
Yeah.
say, it's an extra step, but, you know, all persons can go to this CAL FIRE website, you just type in your address, and it will zoom in there and show you exactly, what zone you're in.
Yeah.
And it looks like our time's up.
Yeah, so we're going to do a speed round here of questions. So we have like a minute, Rick. So fast answers. And this is an easy one, I think. With the 2010 year or older year requirement on the form, if the home is newer, do we still have to provide the form from seller?
It's my, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jane.
It's my understanding that the fire hardening applies to properties built prior to 2010. Right?
And that's correct. I believe that you still want to provide the form, and I think there's even a place on the form that you can note that it doesn't necessarily apply to this house, but yet you're still giving them the proper advisories and the information.
I'll tell you, keep your eyes open. There's a growing movement within the community to have this form bifurcated and separate the fire hardening from the defensible space. I think that's creating some additional confusion in the community. So watch for that. I'm hopeful that our forms update in June will bifurcate this form, and that'll solve that problem.
Yep.
Okay, there's one more question about the maps, which I think we covered, and this is the last question. As a listing agent, we have a property coming out at the end of January. My client's ordered an inspection. What would you advise the seller if they aren't able to get the inspection before close of escrow?
Well, then the seller's going to have to make that decision whether they want to accept the property with or without the inspection having been done, with the understanding that they would then be undertaking an obligation that the statute and the document of the CAL FIRE guidelines specifically say that if for whatever reason the seller is unable to obtain an inspection within the appropriate time, then that obligation shifts to the buyer to have that done within a year. So that's just, again, if you're representing a buyer in that circumstance, they need to understand the possible implications of that in terms of cost, expense, insurance, all of that good stuff.
Okay, so thank you everybody, and thank you to the panelists. We appreciate it. Carla, no questions on sea level, but that's just an indication that you just killed the subject, and nobody has any questions because you handled it so well. So thank you. Rick, thanks a lot. Appreciate all your input, and Jane as well. So We'll be around if anybody has any other questions, and we'll get to new laws in a little bit. Thank you.